Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. This episode is brought to you by The Wellness Paradigm, a holistic health coaching company shifting the way that women understand and heal their bodies. Through bioenergetic testing, functional lab testing, and functional nutrition, we uncover what traditional approaches often overlook. So you can stop guessing, start healing, and finally feel like yourself again. No more one size fits all protocols, just real answers, deep rooted healing, and the clarity and confidence you deserve to feel incredible. It's time to shift the paradigm of women's health. Now, on to our show. And good afternoon, Kendall.
Hello, Shannon. Nice to see you. Nice to be back.
Yes, I'm always excited to chat with Kendall. Kendall's been just such an integral part of our team and just does some wonderful, wonderful things with clients. And I'm really excited to talk about the female nervous system today because this is something that, I think really gets often overlooked. Nervous system has been chatted about a lot more frequently in the last few years, which is amazing. But oftentimes we don't realize that men and women operate differently. And I know Kendall, one of the great skill sets she has is she's also an integrative health practitioner and a somatic therapist. And so she uses this somatic therapy and applied neuroscience and naturopathic nutrition to help women heal. And it's really beautiful to see this blend. We talk about all the time, on a personal level and how important it is to understand both aspects of these. It's not one or the other as far as nervous system or nutrition or, science versus woo. It's like you blend these things together for clients. So I'll hand the floor over to you if you want to give us a quick little intro on, why you got into the nervous system, particularly with female, and kind of how your approach is different.
Yeah, 100%. So my first kind of dive into the nervous system was through my own health journey, which was just through several autoimmune diseases, PTSD, disordered eating, chronic anxiety, all the good stuff, insomnia, realizing eventually, of course, that there was this, how I identified at the time was like, there's a stress component here. So diving into at first mindfulness is where and when I went to this mindfulness course, they had this part where they taught us about the nervous system. And it was kind of one of those moments for me where it's just like those transformational moments, in your life where you see something and you just can never unsee it. And you just say, why isn't everyone talking about this? Why isn't everyone focusing on their nervous system if it actually holds the key to, if my liver's functioning okay, if my female hormones, if my digestive system, my immune system. So it just kind of became this message that I carried with me through my own healing journey. And, once I had a certain level of regulation, I was able to do things like work on my dietary stuff, work on, basic health habits, get into functional medicine. But I always tell people if I hadn't had that baseline, 80, 85% level of regulation in my nervous system, I wouldn't have been able to even put these new habits in place. And that's something I see come up so often with people just to kind of, go off on a little side note there. But, if you're struggling with um, binge eating or your relationship with food, or, I know I should go to the gym, I just can't get myself there, or I know I should sleep earlier, I just end up watching Netflix. Those are all signs of nervous system dysregulation.
Yeah.
And using certain strategies, whether it be food or alcohol, Netflix, social media, procrastination, right, as strategies to soothe that dysregulated nervous system.
Mhm.
So there you go. There's a big kind of doorway that a lot of people still need to walk through,
Yeah.
um, in my eyes. And then, yeah, from there, I did get into naturopathic functional medicine and then somatic therapy because I wanted to dive deeper into the nervous system. Most recently, it's been kind of putting these two sides of the coin together. I spent so many years working with female hormones,
Mhm.
and then now spending the last couple years digging deeper and deeper with the nervous system and realizing that there's also this other gap we haven't explored, which is how do those two things interact? How is the nervous system different in the female body, female physiology? And then the other part of that is just more social. about what it means to socially be a female. So it's both physiological and social that makes the female nervous system different than the male nervous system.
I love that you said that it's not just physiological, because you're right. I mean, just operating as a female in the world, is a very different viewpoint that, yeah, I don't think about quite as much. But I will say, obviously working with clients for many years, it's like when you start integrating this nervous system work, it's like stop just throwing Vitex and, you know,
Right.
magnesium at your problems. Like there are deeper rooted issues, that are driving all of your hormones to tank. Like, but I would be curious, like, what are the biggest things that you see in the female, body?
Yeah, so I'll break it down, and there are, of course, we could go on and on for hours, but
Yeah.
just to make it kind of interesting and simple for you guys, one important thing to understand is that the male nervous system operates primarily surrounding dopamine, whereas the female nervous system centers around oxytocin.
Hmm.
Okay, and you might already know some things about these two guys, but the difference is dopamine, which is highly, highly discussed in the media and social media, and how you're getting your dopamine hit and all of this, again, male nervous system.
Mhm.
Very much about achievement,
Mhm.
very much about kind of pushing through, even times pushing through pain that can still give us kind of that dopamine reward for finishing the task. You did it, right? Whereas oxytocin is actually about connection, it's about safety. Okay. So what happens is really interesting is that as dopamine goes up in the system, oxytocin actually goes down. And the problem I see really frequently when we look at all the nervous system practices that are being, also talked about on social media, many of them are based around that dopamine reward system.
Mm.
Ice baths, for one, right? Getting through that really, really high stress stimulus, okay, gonna give us dopamine reward. So a woman could feel that dopamine spike after and kind of feel, good from those biochemical effects. But in the long run, that's slowly, starting to deplete oxytocin,
Mm.
more dysregulation for her system. Really, really intense breath work where the goal is to kind of go as intense as possible without breaks, without grounding. That would be more of a dopamine based practice. Um, Also, intense exercise, right? We've already kind of talked about this in the lens of hormones, the orange theory, the HIT, way more dopamine. So for males, you often hear them talking like, "Oh my gosh, it helped me so much to do, these intense runs every day and the cold plunges." And actually for them, that's probably true, right? In most cases, it does help them. That reward-based system, that achievement-based system, that I won, I did it, right? Competition. But when they're looking at if they have a female partner, right? Not everyone will, but if they do, or just other females in their life, they might find that there's this disconnect. Like, why aren't these practices working for her? So that is one of the basic things I see. And also just kind of reflecting on how our society in general is very much dopamine based.
Mhm.
It's based around external achievement, competition.
Mhm.
When were we ever taught in school connection? No,
Mhm.
who gets the best grades? Who wins the competition? Or, oh, who actually made the best, connection and friendship with their classmates? I was never taught that.
Mhm.
Person. So we almost just start to see too how our outer world is very much, our society is actually also prioritizing the male nervous system over the female nervous system.
So
Mhm.
interesting. Understanding dopamine and oxytocin is fascinating, really, and so important to understand. I feel like it clicks for hopefully a lot of people listening, like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Because we're in a very masculine dominated world, and even, a lot of people listening are, working women, entrepreneurs who are very much also in the
Yeah.
masculine. And it feels almost like a weakness or a slowing down if we, challenge that dopamine hits that we constantly get versus understanding that this oxytocin is a little bit more how we're wired. And so how do you suggest women kind of balancing these two together?
Yeah. So I think it's, I'd love to just give you the 1 5 minute practice and there
Right.
you go, right? You're good to go for the rest of your life. But that's actually the nature of it, that this is a relationship. And oxytocin is so much about how the female nervous system prioritizes relationship. So one really important thing I want to say about that is when we think about, especially if we do have a past history of trauma, or just in general, the type of stress we go through as women on a daily basis. One of the areas that's going to be really important for women to hone into on their nervous system healing journey is their
Mm.
attachment system. And not saying it's not important for men, right? But just for women, that's completely amplified in the system. And because of that presence of oxytocin, our stress responses and our nervous system responses are much more likely to be attachment based. So, to kind of break that down into simpler terms, what does that mean? We're much more likely to become the perfectionist and the people pleaser and sacrifice our own authenticity, our own well being, because in our nervous system, survival is so much based around maintaining that like connection,
Mhm.
with the tribe evolutionarily. So it's like, well, I haven't eaten all day, my blood sugar's all over the place. I don't like this job I'm doing, but sure, I'll do 2 extra hours of work for my boss because I would never risk losing that connection because inside your nervous system is wired that like this is the most important thing,
Yeah, 100%.
or even toxic and dangerous relationships, right? It's so hard sometimes for a woman to leave them
Hmm.
because the nervous system is wired, no, 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 don't leave it. No, that's you. This is our only connection. This is our mate, right? Don't leave it. Don't leave it. So not that it's not hard for men, again, but it's just amplified and amplified for women. All those signals we get from comparison, from social media, from our partners or relationships, and how much that actually affects our nervous system. And I think the first step is just allowing that, recognizing that, reflecting on how that's coming through in your life. Um, and then the second thing I can say about that is giving yourself permission to allow healing relationships and not feeling like you have to do it all on your own.
Hmm.
Because again, a relationship with a therapist, a coach, even like a really good friend is going to give you that oxytocin type of stimulus bond as well, that's going to facilitate and it's going to start to rewire that attachment system for more safety and more regulation. So it's like, on one hand, looking at how we've gotten into problematic patterns with our nervous system attachment patterns of relationships or work, and where we're self-sacrificing and things like this. But the other is inviting in, right? Because sometimes women say, oh, just put a barrier up. I'm not going to invite any relationships into my life, right? Because they screwed me up. So, no, actually, it's also the healing is inviting in communities, groups, coaches, therapists, teachers that can actually serve to be a witness with you and a guide in your healing journey as well. So, that is one thing that, yeah, I would start out by emphasizing.
So important. I feel like we could have a whole podcast about attachment styles and how
Definitely.
so
Yeah.
and it'll come on for round three.
Yeah, of course, anytime. Yeah.
But I think so many women we've worked with, right? They want to do it on their own, right? They want to push
Yeah.
like a sign of
Yeah.
weakness if they have to talk to a therapist or friend, and they don't want to appear weak, right? Or
Mhm.
vulnerable is another big one, right? Like if somebody's in this middle ground where it's like, hey, I understand the science of what you're saying. I understand it can help, but yet I'm going to bury myself in a hole and hide these feelings because that's safer for me. That's what I've done my whole life. And we could also have a whole long hour conversation of how this shows up as autoimmune issues later in life.
Yeah, we can do that too. I would love
But
to.
would you suggest as far as like how to change a little bit of that mindset around that?
I think honestly, the first step is coming back into relation with oneself. Because if you think about so much of that insecurity with the external of paying too close attention to like what others think and staying in toxic relationships, and on the same way saying, I can't ask for help because I need to come off as someone who doesn't need anything, to not have any needs. They're both issues based in insecure attachment with oneself. Because a securely attached individual on a nervous system perspective is not only able to be okay with being by themselves and not feel like they need to compare and they need to ask for approval from everyone, but also they feel good asking for help and establishing co-regulation and positive relationships. So we might be to one side of the spectrum there, or we might experience both in different areas of our lives, depending, right? But the first step is really establishing secure relation with yourself. So that involves really coming back into relation. It can be largely through your body, coming back into being with your own experience. Okay, and there's a lot of different somatic and nervous system based practices that can start to develop that relationship and start to have you, explore that relationship. But also, if you do have a history, you've gone through a lot of life transitions, chronic stress, and trauma, I would also consider maybe a coach or a therapist who does this work because I know not every single person's going to be wanting to work one-on-one with someone. But that can be an amazing, amazing outside perspective for someone to kind of guide you and look at the blind spots with you. And if that's one-on-one isn't realistic, maybe a group, maybe even think like in your community, maybe there's a women's circle and start by going there and just seeing, being in women in this different type of environment, what's coming up, and lots of possibilities, right? But first, getting secure attachment with oneself, which is largely done via that nervous system level. And then being able to see where I need to have clear boundaries and where I need to actually be able to reach out and invite people into my life and relationships into my life and need to be vulnerable sometimes.
Mm, yeah, beautiful. Just kind of wrapping things up, although we could talk for literally hours on this topic, but if a woman's a little bit stuck in these patterns, right, wants to shift, wants to change, maybe isn't quite ready for a one-on-one coach yet,
Yeah.
just kind of exploring what this even means. What would you say would be two or three things she can start today to shift her body a little bit more into this safer space?
Well, I think one, to just pick one type of nervous system, regulation-based practice that you could be consistent with, that you feel kind of brings yourself back to you on a daily basis, and start that as an exploratory practice. So for oxytocin, a lot of the practices that are most favorable are more really emphasizing safety. Okay, so think about a practice, whether that be some certain pattern of breathing, grounding, even combining those guys with self-touch is really amazing for oxytocin. So even this like breathing pattern of inhaling for 5, exhaling for 5, with a hand on the heart and a hand on the belly. Okay, it doesn't have to be complicated, but start exploring, how this nervous system practice is showing up for you. So I would have that as just a baseline to see what's going on and get a little bit more clear about those two areas we kind of talked about. Where are maybe my relationships or looking in the external world for validation and the perfectionism and the people pleasing where is that showing up for me? Just being really honest. How is that potentially affecting me? Looking at how feeling into your body and breath patterns when you're around certain people or comparing yourself on social media, when you find yourself thinking about these things, maybe even your relationship with your partner, right? That can be really tricky, but looking there, how is my body reacting? Am I contracting? Am I breathing more shallow? Do I feel something in my gut, in my chest, in my throat? Is that trying to speak to me? Right. And then the other question, the last one would just be, where maybe is my past or my wounds? Where are they not letting kind of love and connection come through? And just also starting to answer that from a body-based perspective of, are there moments when I wish I could tell someone something? I wish I could actually reach out and hire a therapist or a coach. I wish I could go to the women's circle, but something's like kind of putting this barrier up in me, and also be honest and feel into that. And so kind of those three areas, the self, maybe where I need more boundaries, more limits, more, and then maybe also where I need more support, more reaching out, more opening in some ways, and just see what comes up.
Yeah, I tell people get curious,
Get curious, curiosity, compassion for yourself and your own experience in the process. But we have to be honest. If we want to truly know where we need the healing, where we need the help, we have to start with that presence with ourselves, our honesty. And, your nervous system, like we kind of talked about at the beginning, is ultimately controlling not only your brain in terms if we're going more to anxiety, depression, all this stuff, but also those internal organs, liver, heart, lungs, female reproductive organs, digestive tract. So really understanding what might be keeping your nervous system in an elevated state of survival, physiology, super, super important for your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health, your career. And for women, it just looks a little bit different than it does for men sometimes. And I think also just being okay with that and understanding how our physiology and our social conditioning, comes in to be part of the story as well.
Love it. Love it. And feel like we could go for hours more on this conversation. But I am going to wrap things up. And if you guys are curious on learning more, one, I know Kendall did an amazing podcast episode a few months ago you can check out. But also, Kendall, if people wanted to connect with you a little bit more, where can they find you?
So on Instagram, my name, Kendall_Hitch. I have my link to my website, Heal with Kendall. I work one-on-one with women, but I also have a practitioner program for health practitioners, coaches, life coaches who, really want to add nervous system work into their specialty or kind of into the programs they offer, any of that good stuff, or just into their own life. That's valid too. So you can check me out there. And then, of course, if you have questions, feel free to reach out.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, Kendall, as always, thank you so much for being here. And if you guys found this helpful, I would love for you to share it with a friend. Shoot Kendall or me a DM. We always love to hear if this was helpful for you. Or leave a review is always helpful so more people can also find this as well. But thank you guys for being here, and we'll catch you on the next show. Bye,
Thank
Kendall.
you. Bye.